Welcome to our journey through Viking history. Today, we'll delve deep into the fascinating world of the Vikings, an era marked by exploration, conquest, and cultural richness. The Vikings, originating from the Scandinavian regions of modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, were not just the fierce warriors and raiders, as often portrayed. They were also traders, explorers, and settlers whose influence spanned from the icy reaches of the North Atlantic to the warm waters of the Mediterranean. In this video, we'll explore the origins of the Viking Age, which began around the late 8th century, and trace its impact over the next 300 years. We'll look at their seafaring prowess, the complex societal structures they built, and the lasting cultural legacies they left behind. We'll also debunk some of the common myths and misconceptions about Vikings, showing them as more than just savage raiders, but as complex people with a sophisticated culture. So, whether you're a history enthusiast or just curious about this intriguing part of the past, stay tuned for an in-depth exploration of Viking history. The roots of Viking society stretch back to a time long before the Viking Age began. The Scandinavian people, isolated by rugged terrain and harsh climates, developed unique cultures that were closely tied to their environment. The land was difficult to farm, leading these early Norse people to turn to the sea for survival. Fishing, whaling, and sealing became essential industries, and as their seafaring skills developed, so too did their desire to explore. The societal structure in early Viking communities was tribal and clan-based. These societies were led by chieftains who wielded power through both wealth and warfare. Kinship and loyalty were paramount, and family ties dictated much of social life. Norse mythology and religious beliefs were also central to their society, with gods like Odin, Thor, and Freyja playing significant roles in their daily lives. These deities were seen as powerful forces that could influence everything from the weather to the outcomes of battles. As population pressures grew and resources became scarcer, these Norse communities began to look beyond their shores for new opportunities. This drive to explore and expand led to the beginning of the Viking Age, which historians often mark with the raid on the monastery of Lindisfarne in 793 AD. This event shocked the Christian world and marked the Vikings as fearsome raiders, but it was only the beginning of a much larger story. To truly understand the Vikings, it's essential to consider their environment. The Scandinavian peninsula is a land of stark contrasts, long, dark winters and short, intense summers. The geography includes deep fjords, rugged coastlines, and dense forests, all of which played a role in shaping the Viking way of life. The harsh climate meant that farming was difficult, and only small portions of the land were arable. This scarcity of resources may have been one of the driving factors behind the Vikings' turn to the sea, as they sought to supplement their limited agricultural output with the riches of other lands. The early Norse people were predominantly farmers, but they were also hunters, fishers, and gatherers. Their diet was largely dependent on what they could cultivate, hunt, or fish. Grain crops like barley and rye were staples, along with root vegetables like turnips and carrots. They also raised livestock, cattle, sheep, and pigs, which provided meat, milk, and wool. However, the limited growing season meant that these resources were often scarce, leading to periods of hunger and hardship. The sea, therefore, became a lifeline. The early Norse were skilled fishermen, and their diet included a significant amount of fish, particularly cod and herring. Whaling and sealing were also important activities, providing not just meat, but also oil, which was used for lighting and as a lubricant. As their seafaring skills improved, these early Scandinavian communities began to venture further afield, trading with neighboring tribes and exploring new lands. Religion and mythology were deeply intertwined with the Vikings' daily lives. The Norse pantheon was vast and complex, with gods and goddesses who represented various aspects of life and nature. Odin, the Allfather, was the god of wisdom, war, and death. Thor, his son, was the god of thunder and protector of mankind. Freyja was the goddess of love, fertility, and war. These deities were worshipped in various ways, including sacrifices, feasts, and the construction of temples. The Vikings believed that the gods played an active role in their lives, influencing everything from the outcome of a battle to the success of a harvest. One of the most intriguing aspects of Viking religion was their belief in fate, or word. The Vikings believed that each person's life was woven into the fabric of the cosmos by the Norns, three powerful beings who controlled fate. This belief in predestination was a central part of Norse mythology and influenced how the Vikings approached life, death, and warfare. They believed that a person's fate was unavoidable, and this fatalistic outlook made them fearless in battle, as they believed that their time of death was already decided by the gods. The Viking Age is often characterized by the relentless raids that these seafaring warriors carried out across Europe. However, their expansion was not merely about looting and pillaging. It was also about exploration, trade, and settlement. The Vikings, with their advanced shipbuilding techniques, were unparalleled navigators who could traverse the open seas with precision. Their iconic longships, with their shallow drafts, allowed them to sail up rivers and strike deep into the heart of Europe. The Viking expansion was driven by several factors, including the search for arable land, the lure of wealth, and the desire for adventure. They established trade routes that stretched from the Byzantine Empire to the British Isles and as far west as Newfoundland in North America. Vikings were instrumental in the development of major trade centers such as Dublin, York, and Novgorod, and their influence can be seen in the economic and cultural exchanges that took place across these regions. The Vikings didn't just raid, they also settled. In England, they established the Danelaw, a region under Viking control where Norse laws and customs prevailed. In France, they were granted land by the Frankish king, which would later become Normandy, named after the Norsemen. In Russia, Viking traders and warriors, known as the Varangians, played a crucial role in the formation of the Kievan Rus, a state that would eventually evolve into modern Russia. One of the most significant aspects of Viking expansion was their exploration of the North Atlantic. The Vikings were the first Europeans to reach Iceland, Greenland, and North America. The settlement of Iceland began around 870 AD, led by Norse chieftains who sought new lands to farm. Iceland's harsh environment posed many challenges, but the settlers adapted, creating a unique society that thrived in isolation. The Icelandic sagas, written down centuries later, provide detailed accounts of these early settlers and their struggles. From Iceland, the Vikings ventured further west, discovering Greenland around 980 AD. Led by Eric the Red, a group of settlers established two colonies on the southern coast of Greenland. The climate was harsher than in Iceland, but the settlers managed to survive by farming and hunting. Greenland remained a Viking colony for several centuries, although it eventually declined due to environmental changes and isolation from Europe. Perhaps the most remarkable achievement of Viking exploration was their discovery of North America. Around the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson, the son of Eric the Red, led an expedition that landed on the coast of what is now Newfoundland in Canada. The Vikings established a short-lived settlement they called Vinland, but they were unable to maintain a permanent presence due to conflicts with the indigenous peoples and the logistical challenges of supplying such a distant outpost. While the Viking presence in North America was brief, it is a testament to their seafaring skills and adventurous spirit. The discovery of Vinland demonstrates that the Vikings were capable of crossing the Atlantic Ocean nearly 500 years before Christopher Columbus. Although their settlement in North America was ultimately unsuccessful, it remains a significant chapter in the history of exploration. Back in Europe, the Vikings' expansion was not without resistance. As they raided and settled in various regions, they encountered opposition from local rulers and established powers. The Frankish Empire, under Charlemagne and his successors, mounted a determined defense against Viking incursions. The construction of fortified bridges and the use of cavalry helped to repel many Viking raids, particularly along the Seine and Loire rivers. In England, the Vikings faced a series of battles against the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. The most famous of these conflicts was the Battle of Edington in 878 AD, where the Anglo-Saxon king Alfred the Great defeated the Viking army led by Guthrum. This victory marked a turning point in the struggle between the Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons, leading to the establishment of a peace treaty and the division of England between the Danelaw and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. Despite these setbacks, the Vikings continued to exert influence across Europe. Their raids and settlements contributed to the political fragmentation of several regions, including the Carolingian Empire and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. However, they also facilitated cultural exchange, as Viking settlers adopted elements of the local cultures they encountered and, in turn, introduced Norse customs and practices to these regions. Viking society was complex and multifaceted, with a rich culture that extended beyond their reputation as warriors. Their social structure was hierarchical, with a clear division between classes. At the top were the nobles and chieftains, who owned large estates and wielded significant power. Beneath them were the free men, known as carls, who were typically farmers, craftsmen, or warriors. At the bottom were the thralls, or slaves, who were often captured during raids and had no rights. Despite these class distinctions, Viking society was relatively fluid. A carl could become a noble through success in battle or by amassing wealth, while a noble could lose his status through misfortune. This fluidity allowed for social mobility, which was somewhat unusual for the time. Women in Viking society also enjoyed more rights than in many other contemporary cultures. They could own property, inherit wealth, and even divorce their husbands, a stark contrast to the patriarchal norms of much of medieval Europe. The Vikings were also deeply religious, and their beliefs permeated every aspect of life. Norse mythology was a rich tapestry of gods, giants, and mythical creatures, and the sagas that recounted these tales were passed down orally through generations. These stories were not just entertainment. They served as a moral framework, offering lessons on bravery, honor, and fate. The concept of fate, or weird, was central to Viking belief, with the idea that one's destiny was predetermined by the gods and inescapable. Viking religion was closely tied to their understanding of the natural world. The Norse believed that the world was inhabited by a variety of supernatural beings, including elves, dwarves, and spirits of the land and sea. These beings were often capricious and could be either helpful or harmful, depending on how they were treated. The Vikings practiced various rituals to appease these spirits, including offerings of food, drink, and even animal sacrifices. One of the most important aspects of Viking religion was the belief in an afterlife. The Vikings believed that the dead could go to several different realms, depending on how they had lived their lives and how they had died. The most famous of these realms is Valhalla, the Hall of the Slain, where warriors who died in battle would be taken to feast with the god Odin. However, not all Vikings aspired to Valhalla. Many hoped to be reunited with their ancestors in Hel, a more peaceful realm ruled by the goddess Hel. The Vikings also had a rich tradition of art and craftsmanship. Their jewelry, weapons, and household items were often intricately decorated with patterns and symbols that held religious or cultural significance. Viking art was characterized by its use of interlacing patterns, stylized animals, and abstract designs, which were often carved into wood, bone, and metal. The most famous examples of Viking art are the ornate dragon-head carvings on their longships, which were believed to ward off evil spirits. Viking literature is another important aspect of their cultural legacy. The sagas and Eddas, written down in the centuries after the Viking Age, provide a window into the beliefs, values, and experiences of the Norse people. These texts include both mythological stories and historical accounts, blending fact and fiction in a way that reflects the Vikings' understanding of the world. The sagas, in particular, are epic narratives that recount the deeds of legendary heroes, explorers, and kings, and they remain a significant part of Scandinavian cultural heritage. Another vital aspect of Viking society was their legal system. The Vikings had a well-developed legal tradition that was based on a combination of customary law and the decisions of local assemblies known as things. The thing was a central institution in Viking society, where free men would gather to resolve disputes, make decisions on communal matters, and pass judgment on legal cases. The decisions of the thing were binding, and those who violated its rulings could be declared outlaws, losing all legal protection and rights. The concept of honor was central to Viking society, and many of the legal disputes that arose were related to issues of personal honor, such as slights, insults, or injuries. The Vikings had a strong sense of individual and familial reputation, and maintaining one's honor was often a matter of life and death. This emphasis on honor is reflected in the sagas, where characters often engage in feuds and revenge killings to restore their honor or that of their kin. Marriage and family were also important aspects of Viking life. Marriages were often arranged by families as a way to form alliances and strengthen social ties. Dowries and bride prices were common, with wealth and land being exchanged as part of the marriage agreement. Viking weddings were elaborate ceremonies that involved feasting, gift-giving, and religious rituals, including the exchange of swords and the blessing of the marriage bed by the gods. Family life in Viking society was centered around the longhouse, a large communal building that served as the home for extended families. The longhouse was the heart of Viking domestic life, where families ate, slept, and worked together. It was also a place where stories were told and oral traditions were passed down from one generation to the next. The family was the primary social unit, and loyalty to one's kin was a fundamental value in Viking society. In addition to their social and cultural practices, the Vikings were also skilled craftsmen and traders. Their craftsmanship is evident in the tools, weapons, and jewelry they produced, much of which was traded across Europe. Viking blacksmiths were particularly renowned for their ability to forge high-quality swords and axes, which were highly prized by warriors both within and outside Viking society. The Ulfbert swords, for example, were made with a type of high-carbon steel that was far superior to the materials available in most of Europe at the time. Trade was another essential aspect of Viking society. The Vikings established extensive trade networks that connected Scandinavia with the rest of Europe, the Byzantine Empire, and even the Islamic world. They traded a variety of goods, including furs, amber, walrus ivory, and slaves. In return, they acquired luxury items such as silver, silk, spices, and wine. The Vikings were not only raiders, but also shrewd merchants who played a crucial role in the economic exchanges of the medieval world. The trade routes established by the Vikings helped to facilitate cultural exchange as well. As they traveled and traded, the Vikings encountered new ideas, technologies, and customs, some of which they adopted into their own culture. The spread of Christianity in Scandinavia, for example, was partly a result of interactions with Christian traders and missionaries. By the end of the Viking Age, most of the Scandinavian kingdoms had converted to Christianity, marking a significant shift in Viking religious practices and beliefs. The transition to Christianity was gradual and complex, with elements of Norse paganism persisting in Scandinavian culture for centuries. The Christianization of the Vikings was often a top-down process, with kings and chieftains converting first and then encouraging or compelling their subjects to follow suit. The conversion process was not always peaceful. In some cases, it involved the destruction of pagan temples and the persecution of those who resisted the new faith. However, in other cases, the transition was more syncretic, with Christian and pagan practices coexisting for a time. One of the most famous examples of this syncretism is the Jelling stones in Denmark, which were erected by King Harald Bluetooth in the 10th century. These stones, which are inscribed with runes, depict both pagan and Christian imagery, symbolizing the merging of the two belief systems. The larger of the two stones is often referred to as Denmark's baptismal certificate, because it declares that Harald made the Danes Christian. The Jelling stones are a powerful testament to the cultural and religious changes that took place during the Viking Age. The Viking Age began to decline in the late 11th century, but the reasons for this are complex and multifaceted. One of the main factors was the gradual Christianization of the Scandinavian countries. As the Vikings converted to Christianity, they abandoned many of their old practices, including raiding. The Christian Church exerted a strong influence, promoting peace and discouraging the violent raids that had characterized the earlier years of the Viking Age. Another factor was the growing resistance from the regions the Vikings targeted. Over time, European kingdoms became better organized and more capable of defending against Viking incursions. The development of fortified towns and the improvement of military tactics made it increasingly difficult for the Vikings to carry out successful raids. Additionally, the political landscape in Scandinavia itself was changing, with the emergence of stronger, centralized kingdoms that focused more on internal stability and less on external conquest. The final nail in the coffin for the Viking Age was the Battle of Stamford Bridge in 1066. This battle marked the end of the Viking influence in England, as King Harald Hardrada of Norway was defeated by the English King Harold Godwinson. Just a few weeks later, William the Conqueror, a descendant of Viking settlers in Normandy, would invade England, bringing the era of Viking dominance to a close. However, the end of the Viking Age did not mean the end of Viking influence. Many of the regions they had settled, such as Normandy and the Danelaw in England, retained elements of Norse culture and governance long after the Viking raids had ceased. The Normans, who were descended from Viking settlers in France, would go on to play a significant role in European history, particularly with their conquest of England in 1066. In Scandinavia, the end of the Viking Age marked the beginning of the medieval period, during which the Scandinavian kingdoms consolidated their power and integrated more fully into Christian Europe. The process of Christianization was accompanied by the development of written laws, the establishment of monasteries, and the construction of stone churches. These changes helped to transform the Scandinavian kingdoms into more centralized and stable states. The decline of the Viking Age was also influenced by economic factors. As European trade routes shifted and new centers of commerce emerged, the Vikings' role as traders diminished. The rise of the Hanseatic League, a powerful commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds in Northern Europe, further marginalized Scandinavian trade networks. Additionally, changes in climate, such as the onset of the Little Ice Age, may have made farming and settlement in some of the Viking colonies more difficult, contributing to their decline. Despite these challenges, the legacy of the Vikings endured in various ways. In Iceland, the descendants of Viking settlers continued to maintain their distinctive culture and language, which was preserved in the Icelandic sagas. These sagas, written down in the 13th century, remain some of the most important literary works of the medieval period and provide a unique insight into the lives and beliefs of the Norse people. In the British Isles, the impact of Viking settlement can still be seen in place names, language, and legal traditions. Many English words of Norse origin, such as window, from Old Norse vindauga, and sky, from Old Norse ski, have become an integral part of the English language. The legal concept of the thing, a form of assembly or council, also has its roots in Viking tradition and can be seen in the modern parliamentary systems of Scandinavia. The influence of the Vikings also extended to the arts and architecture. The distinctive style of Viking art, characterized by intricate interlacing patterns and stylized animal motifs, continued to influence European art long after the Viking Age had ended. In architecture, the stave churches of Norway, which date back to the 12th century, are a unique blend of Christian and Viking design elements, with their wooden construction and dragon-headed carvings. Although the Viking Age ended nearly 1,000 years ago, its legacy continues to influence modern culture in numerous ways. The Vikings left behind a wealth of archaeological evidence, including artifacts, ship burials, and rune stones that have provided invaluable insights into their way of life. These discoveries have helped to shape our understanding of Viking society and have dispelled many of the myths that have surrounded them for centuries. One of the most significant contributions of the Vikings was their role in the development of maritime technology. Their shipbuilding techniques were far ahead of their time, and their innovations influenced naval architecture for centuries. The design of the longship, in particular, was revolutionary, allowing for faster, more agile vessels that could navigate both open seas and shallow rivers. This innovation laid the groundwork for the future of European exploration and trade. The Vikings also had a lasting impact on the languages and cultures of the regions they settled. In England, many Old Norse words were incorporated into the English language, particularly in areas that were part of the Danelaw. Place names in the British Isles and Normandy still bear traces of their Norse origins, and some Viking customs, such as the Thing, a form of assembly or council, have echoes in modern democratic practices. In modern times, the image of the Viking has been romanticized and popularized through various forms of media, including literature, film, and television. The stereotypical image of the Viking as a fearsome warrior with a horned helmet has become a cultural icon, despite the fact that there is no historical evidence to support the idea that Vikings wore horned helmets. This image has been perpetuated by operas like Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen, and more recently by television series like Vikings and The Last Kingdom. However, modern scholarship has sought to provide a more nuanced and accurate portrayal of Viking society. Historians and archaeologists have emphasized the diversity of Viking activities, including their roles as traders, settlers, and explorers. The romanticized image of the Viking warrior has been balanced with an understanding of the Vikings as a people with a rich and complex culture who contributed to the development of European civilization in many ways. The Viking legacy is also evident in modern Scandinavian culture. The countries of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark all celebrate their Viking heritage through festivals, museums, and educational programs. In Iceland, the Viking sagas remain a central part of the national identity, and the country's history as a Viking settlement is a source of pride. The Icelandic language, which has changed little since the Viking Age, is a living link to the past and a testament to the enduring influence of Norse culture. In addition to their influence on language and culture, the Vikings also played a role in shaping the genetic makeup of modern populations. Genetic studies have shown that the descendants of Viking settlers can be found across Europe, particularly in regions that were part of the Danelaw or were colonized by Norse settlers. The spread of Viking genes has contributed to the genetic diversity of these populations and has left a lasting legacy in the DNA of modern Europeans. The study of Viking history continues to be a vibrant and evolving field. New archaeological discoveries, such as the recent excavation of Viking ship burials in Norway, continue to shed light on the lives and beliefs of the Norse people. Advances in technology, such as DNA analysis and remote sensing, have also opened up new avenues of research, allowing historians and archaeologists to explore Viking history in ways that were previously unimaginable. The fascination with Vikings shows no signs of waning. In recent years, there has been a resurgence of interest in Viking history and culture, fueled by popular media and new academic research. Viking reenactment groups, living history events, and even Viking-themed tours have become increasingly popular, allowing people to experience a taste of Viking life firsthand. This renewed interest in the Vikings is a testament to their enduring appeal and the lasting impact they have had on the world. As we look to the future, it is clear that the legacy of the Vikings will continue to captivate and inspire, whether through their contributions to maritime technology, their influence on language and culture, or their role in shaping the genetic heritage of Europe. The Vikings remain an integral part of our shared history. Their story is a reminder of the power of exploration, the importance of cultural exchange, and the enduring impact that one society can have on the world. The Vikings were a people of contrasts, fierce warriors and skilled traders, raiders and settlers, pagans who eventually embraced Christianity. Their impact on the world was profound and far-reaching, shaping the course of European history in ways that are still felt today. From the stories of their gods and heroes to the lasting marks they left on the lands they touched, the legacy of the Vikings continues to captivate our imagination. In this video, we've journeyed through the origins of Viking society, explored their expansion and influence across Europe, and examined the rich cultural and societal structures they developed. We've also looked at the decline of the Viking Age and the enduring legacy they left behind. Whether through their myths and legends, their innovations in seafaring, or their contributions to the languages and cultures of the regions they influenced, the Vikings remain a pivotal part of our shared history. As we conclude, it's essential to remember that the Vikings were not just the marauding invaders depicted in popular culture. They were a complex society with a rich heritage, one that contributed significantly to the development of the medieval world. Their story is a reminder of the power of exploration, the importance of cultural exchange, and the enduring impact that one society can have on the world. Thank you for joining me on this journey through Viking history. If you enjoyed this exploration, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the fascinating stories of our past. This expanded screen